Thomas Winterton has been at Skinwalker Ranch longer than almost anyone connected to the current investigation. He has watched every season of evidence accumulate from the inside. He has seen what the cameras captured and what they did not. He has been present for the discoveries that made the broadcast record and the ones that did not. He has been silent about all of it, until now. What he just broke silence on changes everything the investigation has ever established. Subscribe and stay until the very end. Thomas Winterton's position at Skinwalker Ranch is one of the most significant and most underappreciated dimensions of the investigation's complete record. His role as the ranch's property manager, the person whose sustained physical presence on the property across the full span of the current investigation, gives him a relationship to the ranch's phenomenon that no visiting scientist, no production crew member, and no rotating cast of expert consultants can replicate, has placed him in a position of sustained direct exposure to what the ranch produces that the broadcast record has never fully represented. He is not there when the cameras arrive. He is there when they leave. He is there during the periods between filming sessions when the monitoring infrastructure runs continuously, and the anomalous events it documents are witnessed only by the people whose professional responsibility keeps them on the property regardless of whether the production is active. That sustained presence is the foundation of what his silence has been protecting and what its breaking now reveals. The broadcast record of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation presents the findings of a scientific team that arrives, investigates, and documents. What it does not present, what the format of a production-scheduled investigation cannot capture by definition, is the continuous record of what the property produces between sessions, witnessed by the people whose presence on the ranch is not contingent on a filming schedule. Thomas Winterton is the person whose accumulated experience of the ranch across both its documented and its undocumented periods gives him the most complete picture of what the property actually produces that any single individual connected to the investigation possesses. More complete than Brandon Fugal's, whose ownership does not require continuous physical presence. More complete than Travis Taylor's, whose scientific engagement with the property is organized around the investigation sessions rather than the intervals between them. Winterton has been at the ranch consistently, across the full span of the investigation's history. What that sustained presence has produced in terms of his understanding of what the ranch is and what it does is what his silence has contained, and what his breaking of it now releases into the public record for the first time. The discovery he is breaking silence on is not a single event from a single session. It is the culmination of what sustained presence at the most anomalous property in American research history produces in the person who has been most consistently exposed to it. The Skinwalker Ranch broadcast record is built around investigation sessions, the structured deployments of the scientific team and the production crew whose combined activity at the property generates the findings that the episodes present. Those sessions are significant. The evidence they have produced across 5 seasons of broadcast content represents the most extensively documented paranormal investigation record in American television history, but they represent a fraction of the complete record of what the property produces, the fraction that occurs during the specific windows when the investigation infrastructure is active and the cameras are running. The property does not confine its activity to those windows. The monitoring infrastructure that runs continuously between sessions has been accumulating a data record whose complete contents the broadcast episodes have addressed selectively, presenting the most dramatically significant findings while the full data set remains in the technical archive whose existence the investigation's public communications have acknowledged without fully characterizing. Thomas Winterton has direct knowledge of what that continuous monitoring record contains. He has been present when anomalous events occurred outside the filming schedule. He has observed phenomenon that the production cameras were not running to document, and that the monitoring infrastructure captured in the instrument data without the visual and contextual documentation that the filming sessions provide. He has had conversations with the scientific team about findings from the continuous monitoring record that have not entered any broadcast episode, and he has developed across his sustained presence at the property an understanding of the ranch's behavioral patterns, the cyclical character of its activity, the relationship between different categories of phenomenon, and the specific conditions under which the most extreme events occur, that the session-based investigation format has never been able to develop because it does not have access to the continuous record that sustained presence provides. What that understanding has produced in Thomas Winterton is the specific knowledge that his silence has been protecting, knowledge about a discovery whose character and whose implications the investigation's most recent findings have made impossible for him to continue managing within the silence that his professional relationship to the property had previously sustained. The discovery changed everything about what he understood the ranch to be. It changed everything about what he understood the investigation to be approaching. And it changed the specific calculation about whether continued silence was something his understanding of what the discovery means could accommodate. He broke the silence, and what he is saying in breaking it is what this video documents in full. The discovery Thomas Winterton is breaking silence on did not occur within a single investigation session whose broadcast version the audience can identify from the show's episode record. It is a discovery whose development unfolded across a period of continuous monitoring and direct observation that spans multiple investigation cycles, a finding whose full significance emerged progressively rather than in a single dramatic event, and whose complete picture required the sustained presence that Winterton's role at the property provided throughout its development. The beginning of what the discovery eventually revealed was present in the monitoring data earlier than the investigation's public communications have established as the timeline of the relevant findings. Winterton had been noting a specific pattern in the continuous monitoring data, a pattern whose character the investigation's technical team had been tracking within the session-based framework of the broadcast investigation, without having access to the complete picture that the continuous record provided. The electromagnetic data from the active zones of the property had been showing a directional change, not the fluctuating elevation and reduction pattern that transient anomalous events produce in monitoring data, but a sustained, consistent movement in a specific direction that the session-based review of the data had registered as a trend without being able to characterize its endpoint. The endpoint is what Winterton's continuous presence at the property allowed him to observe directly when the trend reached its conclusion. The mesa zone electromagnetic signature reached a threshold state, a specific configuration of the field readings across the monitoring network that the prior data had been moving toward progressively. On a night between investigation sessions when the production cameras were not running and the scientific team was not on the property, Winterton was there. He documented what occurred during the threshold event through the monitoring infrastructure's continuous recording. The instrument data exists in the complete archive, and through his direct observation of what the property produced at the surface level when the underground electromagnetic system reached the threshold configuration. What he observed directly that night is what his silence has been protecting. What the monitoring infrastructure documented is what the investigation's archive contains. And what the combination of direct observation and instrument documentation established about the nature of what the ranch has been approaching across 5 seasons of broadcast investigation is the discovery that changed everything about his understanding, and that the breaking of his silence now makes available to the investigation's audience for the first time. Thomas Winterton's account of what he observed directly during the threshold event. The specific phenomenon the property produced at the surface level when the underground electromagnetic system reached the configuration the monitoring data had been approaching is the most significant element of his silence breaking and the element whose character distinguishes his account from the instrument-based evidence that the investigation's scientific framework has been building across its seasons. The instrument data establishes what the monitoring network detected. Winterton's direct observation establishes what a human being experienced when the threshold was reached. The experiential dimension of the event, whose significance the instruments can measure but cannot fully represent. What he describes observing during the threshold event is consistent with the category of phenomenon that the Skinwalker Ranch investigation's most extreme prior documented events represent, but differs from those prior events in a specific and consequential way that his sustained exposure to the property's full range of outputs gives him the reference framework to identify precisely. The prior events documented in the broadcast record have been phenomena that the property produced in the investigation's vicinity. The threshold event produced phenomenon that was directed, that had the specific character of something whose output was aimed at a location and at the person present at that location, rather than simply occurring in the surrounding environment. Winterton describes the directional quality of what he observed with the plain, specific language of someone whose years of sustained exposure to the property have calibrated his assessment of what the ranch produces against the full range of its documented outputs. He is not describing the most extreme thing he has ever seen. He is describing the most specifically directed thing he has ever seen, the most direct evidence he has encountered in his time at the property that what operates at Skinwalker Ranch is not simply generating phenomenon but deploying it. The distinction between generation and deployment is the most significant thing his direct observation adds to the investigation's complete record. Generation is the behavior of a system operating according to its nature. Deployment is the behavior of a system operating according to a purpose. What Thomas Winterton observed during the threshold event was not generation. It was deployment, and the target of the deployment, the specific location, and the specific person at whom the phenomenon's directional output was aimed was him. The 5 seasons of Skinwalker Ranch broadcast investigation have been building a progressive picture of what the property's underground environment contains and how it relates to the surface phenomenon the investigation has been documenting. The sonar mapping established the existence of structured underground voids whose geometry is inconsistent with natural cave formation. The drilling operation established the existence of a formation boundary whose resistance to approach the investigation has been documenting as it progressively narrowed the distance between the surface operation and the primary underground structure. The electromagnetic monitoring established the existence of a structured signal whose source is underground and whose surface manifestation is concentrated above the formation's most significant mapped features. And the aerial phenomenon documentation established the existence of a consistent relationship between the underground activity the instruments detect and the aerial events the cameras capture, a relationship whose character the investigation has been approaching an explanation for without yet arriving at one within the broadcast framework. What Thomas Winterton's discovery confirms about what the investigation has been approaching is the specific nature of the relationship between the underground infrastructure and the surface phenomenon, the mechanism connecting what is underground to what appears above it and to what the investigation's monitoring systems detect between those two locations. The threshold event he observed provided a direct demonstration of that mechanism, whose character the prior investigation's instrument data had been pointing toward, without producing the kind of direct observational evidence that his presence at the property during the event provided. What he observed is the most direct evidence the investigation's complete record contains of the operational relationship between the underground formation and the surface phenomenon, the physical process by which what is underground produces what the cameras have been documenting above it across 5 seasons of broadcast investigation. That process, its character, its scale, and the specific implications it carries for understanding what the investigation has been studying, is what Winterton's account of the threshold event establishes in terms that the instrument data alone could never fully provide. And it is what the breaking of his silence now makes available to the investigation's audience as the most complete account of the ranch's operational nature that any single individual's direct experience of the property has ever produced. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation's scientific framework has always been built on instrument-based evidence. The electromagnetic readings, the sonar data, the ground-penetrating radar returns, the acoustic measurements, and the thermal imaging whose combined output represents the most extensively documented instrument record of paranormal phenomenon ever compiled at a single location. That instrument-based framework is the investigation's greatest strength in terms of the evidential quality of its findings and its greatest limitation in terms of the complete picture of what the property produces. Instruments measure specific physical parameters within specific detection ranges according to specific operational principles. They document what they are designed to detect within the limits of their design specifications. What occurs outside those limits, what the property produces in dimensions that the deployed instrument suite does not measure, and what the property produces experientially in the people who are directly present when it occurs, is not in the instrument record. Thomas Winterton's direct observation fills the gap that the instrument record's design limitations create. Not by contradicting the instrument data, his account of the threshold event is consistent with the instrument readings the monitoring infrastructure logged during the same period. By adding the dimensions of the event that the instruments did not capture, the directional character of what was produced, the specific quality of the experience of being the target of a directed deployment from the ranch's underground system, and the specific understanding of the ranch's operational nature that direct exposure to that deployment produces in a person whose prior sustained exposure to the property's full range of outputs has given them the reference framework to assess what they are experiencing accurately. Travis Taylor's scientific framework has been the investigation's primary tool for characterizing what the instruments detect. Thomas Winterton's sustained direct experience at the property is the investigation's primary evidence for what the instrument's limitations prevent them from detecting. His account of the threshold event is the most significant addition to the investigation's complete record that the instrument data alone cannot provide, because it documents the experiential dimension of what the underground formation does when it reaches a threshold state in terms that no instrument deployed at the property is designed to capture. That dimension is what his silence has been protecting, and what it's breaking now adds to everything the investigation's scientific record has established. Thomas Winterton's silence about the discovery has not been the silence of someone who did not understand the significance of what he observed. It has been the silence of someone who understood it completely and who made a specific and considered decision about what the appropriate management of that understanding required in the context of his professional relationship to the property and to the investigation that the Fugal ownership of the ranch had organized around it. The factors that sustained the silence across the period between the threshold event and the current breaking of it are not difficult to identify for anyone who understands the specific professional and personal position that Winterton's role at the property creates. He is not a scientist whose professional identity is built on the public communication of research findings. He is not a television presenter whose commercial relationship to the investigation creates incentives for dramatic disclosure. He is the person whose sustained presence at the property, whose day-to-day professional responsibility for the ranch's operational continuity, makes his relationship to what the investigation produces fundamentally different from every other person connected to it. What changed that produced the decision to break the silence is connected to the investigation's most recent developments. The specific findings from the current investigation phase that have moved the investigation's public record to a point where the continued containment of what the threshold event established is no longer consistent with the honest representation of what the investigation has been approaching. The drilling operation's most recent advancement toward the primary underground void, its production of the response event whose basin-wide electromagnetic signature and whose physical effects on the investigation team established the formation's awareness of the drilling's approach, brought the investigation's public record to the threshold of the understanding that Winterton's direct observation of the threshold event had produced in him years earlier. The investigation is approaching what he already knows, and the specific decision that the approach's current proximity produced in him, the assessment that the distance between what the public record has established and what his direct observation established has narrowed to the point where continued silence about the gap is no longer defensible, is what produced the breaking of that silence now. He is not disclosing something the investigation has not been approaching. He is confirming where the approach leads before the investigation arrives there publicly, and the confirmation is what changes everything about how every prior season of the broadcast record should be understood. The History Channel's editorial relationship to the Skinwalker Ranch investigation evidence has been one of the consistent background questions of the broadcast record, the question of what the network knows about the complete investigation findings and what the editorial framework it applies to the broadcast episodes has been managing away from the audience's view. Thomas Winterton's account of the threshold event and the subsequent developments that led to the breaking of his silence addresses the network's awareness of the complete investigation record with a directness whose character reflects his specific knowledge of what the editorial process has received from the investigation and what it has done with that material. He is not speculating about what the network knows. He has been present during the periods when the monitoring data that the editorial process receives has been generated. He has had direct knowledge of the complete record's contents and direct awareness of the subset of that record that has entered the broadcast episodes. The gap between those two things, the gap that his sustained presence at the property and his knowledge of the complete monitoring record has given him a uniquely comprehensive view of, is what his account of the History Channel's editorial relationship to the investigation addresses. What he confirms about the network's awareness of the complete investigation findings is consistent with the pattern that the broadcast record's most attentive viewers have been identifying across multiple seasons, the pattern of evidence management whose character indicates institutional awareness of findings whose full representation would exceed the broadcast format's capacity to contain them within the ongoing search framework that the commercial relationship between the network and the investigation depends on. The threshold event's documentation is in the monitoring archive. The instrument data from the event is in the technical record. The editorial process has received both. What it has broadcast is neither. And Winterton's account of why the threshold event's documentation has not entered any broadcast episode, his specific characterization of the network's response to the material and the instructions that response produced about the material's broadcast status, is the most direct confirmation from the most credible source available of what the History Channel has been managing in its editorial relationship to the investigation's most significant findings. He was there. He knows what the complete record contains. He knows what the editorial process received. And he knows what the broadcast audience has been shown in place of it. The breaking of his silence about all three is what makes his account the most significant disclosure the investigation has ever produced. Thomas Winterton has spent more continuous time at Skinwalker Ranch than any other person connected to the current investigation. The silence he broke is the silence of that complete view. What its breaking changes is the audience's ability to continue understanding the broadcast record as a complete representation of what the investigation has found. It was never complete. The broadcast episodes are the managed fraction of a continuous record whose most significant findings have been contained in an archive whose contents his account has now partially characterized in a way the investigation's scientific framework has never achieved. He knows what is at Skinwalker Ranch, not in the speculative sense of a researcher whose instrument data points toward a conclusion, in the direct observational sense of a person who was present when the ranch demonstrated its operational nature without mediation. He was there when the threshold was reached. He saw what the deployment produced. The ranch is not passive. It is not simply producing phenomenon. It is deploying it, with awareness, with direction. Thomas Winterton's sustained presence gave him the most complete view of that any living person possesses. His silence is broken. What it contained changes everything.